So, an American tourist just told me the Colosseum was built in the wrong place. Not that it's falling apart, not that it needs restoration. He said it was built in the wrong location. And then he tried to show me a TripAdvisor review to prove it. I'm a tour guide in Rome. I've been doing this for 7 years now. 7 long years of walking backwards through ancient streets, answering questions about where gladiators went to the bathroom, and smiling through the same pasta jokes over and over again. I thought I'd seen everything. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was so wrong. Because there's something that happens when American tourists step off their planes and into European cities. Something magical and absolutely terrifying at the same time. They arrive with their phones fully charged, their confidence fully loaded, and their Google search history making them feel like experts. They've read a blog post, maybe 2. They watched a YouTube video while waiting for their airport coffee. And suddenly, they're ready to debate people who've dedicated their entire lives to studying history. Want to know what happens when someone with a travel blog tries to correct someone with a master's degree in front of 2,000-year-old ruins? Buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride.
Let me paint you a picture of what my life looks like. I wake up at 6 a.m. every single morning. I put on the most comfortable shoes I own because I'm about to walk 8 miles through cobblestone streets. I grab my little flag with the red ribbon so my tour groups can spot me in the crowds. I check my water bottle because July in Rome, it feels like standing inside an actual oven. And then I head out to meet complete strangers who've paid good money to learn about one of the greatest civilizations in human history. Most of them are lovely, really. They ask thoughtful questions, they take photos at the right moments, they gasp when I tell them about ancient Roman engineering, they're quiet in the churches, they listen, they tip well. But then there are the others, the ones who interrupt me mid-sentence to say "actually" before sharing something they heard on a podcast, the ones who argue with me about architectural details while literally standing in front of the actual architecture, the ones who pull up their phones and try to fact-check me using websites written by people who've never even been to Italy. And 90% of the time, these confident contradictors have one thing in common: they're American. Now, before you come for me in the comments, let me be crystal clear. I love Americans. Some of my absolute favorite tour groups have been American. They're enthusiastic, they're friendly, they ask genuine questions, they're curious about the world. But there's this special subset, this unique breed of American tourists that comes armed with something more dangerous than a camera or a fanny pack. They come armed with the unshakable belief that their quick internet research is equal to someone else's doctorate degree. I remember my first day as a tour guide. My mentor, Giovanni, pulled me aside near the Spanish Steps. This man was 60 years old. He'd been guiding tours since before I was even born. He put his weathered hand on my shoulder and said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "The hardest part isn't remembering the dates or the facts. The hardest part is keeping a straight face when someone tells you Julius Caesar should have used better security." I laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't joking. Around year 3, I started keeping a mental list. The questions that make me bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The debates that make me want to sit down on ancient Roman stones and just cry. The moments when I have to remind myself that I'm a professional and that strangling a tourist is probably against company policy. So, let me show you what happens when the country that invented TripAdvisor meets people who've dedicated their lives to actual history.
Last Tuesday started like any other day. I met my group at 9 a.m. outside the Pantheon. 15 people total. Families, couples, few solo travelers. The sun was already hot enough to make the air shimmer above the ancient stones. I did my usual introduction, cracked a few jokes to warm everyone up, and then we stepped inside. The Pantheon is my favorite building in Rome, maybe my favorite building in the entire world. It's almost 2,000 years old, and that dome, Still the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built. No steel beams, no modern support systems, just Roman concrete and pure genius. When you stand under that dome and look up at the oculus, that perfect circle of light in the center, you feel small in the best way possible. You feel connected to something ancient and important. I was explaining how they built it, how the Romans mixed volcanic ash into their concrete to make it stronger, how they poured the dome in layers, making each layer lighter as they went higher, how they did all of this without scaffolding, without computers, without any of the tools we think are absolutely necessary today. My group was listening, really listening, their faces tilted up toward that glorious dome. And then I heard it. A hand went up in the back, a man in his 40s wearing a backwards baseball cap and a shirt that said Rome before hose. I should have known right then. Yeah, but couldn't they have just used a crane? I blinked. Once. Twice. Sir, this was built in 126 AD. Right, but like a wooden crane. The Romans had wood. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I tried to explain that while cranes did exist in ancient Rome, they weren't used for dome construction. I tried to explain the engineering behind why that wouldn't work. I tried to use small words and clear examples. He pulled out his phone, right there in the Pantheon, with other tourists trying to enjoy this sacred moment. He started scrolling. "Hold on," he said. "I watched this documentary." He showed me his phone screen. It was a video about medieval castles in England built over 1,000 years after the Pantheon, using completely different techniques. And he was using this to explain to me, a person who talks about this building literally every single day, how Romans definitely used cranes, because he saw it on YouTube. I smiled. I have a very good professional smile. I've perfected it over 7 years. I thanked him for sharing, and I gently moved the group along. But inside, I was screaming into the void. 2 days later, I was standing in the Roman Forum. This is where the heart of ancient Rome beat for centuries, where senators debated, where markets bustled, where history happened in ways that still echo through our modern world. I was talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, the economic collapse, the political chaos, the invasions from the north. It's complicated stuff, but I've learned how to make it interesting, how to help people understand that empires don't just fall overnight. They crumble slowly, piece by piece, for dozens of interconnected reasons. A woman interrupted me. She was maybe 50 years old, wearing a sun hat big enough to shade 3 people. Actually, I read they fell because they used lead pipes for water. Now, this is a real theory. It's been mostly rejected by historians, but it exists, so I nodded. That's one theory, yes, but the evidence suggests, no, I'm sure I saw it on Instagram. For the next 10 minutes, this woman argued with me. She cited 3 influencers. She mentioned their follower counts. She talked about engagement rates like they had anything to do with historical accuracy. 0 historians, 0 academic sources, 0 peer-reviewed studies. Just influencers. I have a master's degree in classical studies. I spent 6 years of my life reading Latin texts and archaeological reports, and I was being corrected by someone who got their information from 15-second videos sandwiched between makeup tutorials. I wanted to sit down right there on a 2,000-year-old stone and just give up. But I didn't. I smiled. I nodded. I said something diplomatic about how history is always evolving and we're learning new things, and we moved on. The next day, I took a group to the Trevi Fountain. It's one of the most beautiful Baroque fountains in the world. Massive sculptures of Neptune and his chariot, water cascading over ancient stone, the whole thing glowing white in the afternoon sun. I was explaining the symbolism, the artistic movement that created it, how every single detail means something specific. A young guy raised his hand. Why'd they put it in such a touristy area, though? I stared at him. They built it in 1762, before tourism existed as we know it. Yeah, but they should have known people would want to see it. My brain just stopped, completely stopped. What do you even say to that? How do you explain that people in 1762 couldn't predict the invention of cameras and tour buses and TripAdvisor? I had no response, nothing. I just stood there with my mouth slightly open while the fountain splashed behind me. And that's when I started to understand something. Americans don't debate because they want to learn the truth. They debate because something in their culture tells them that confidence equals knowledge, that having an opinion, any opinion, is the same as having expertise, that a Google search from their Uber ride over makes them qualified to question anyone about anything. It's not mean-spirited, it's almost innocent, like watching a child insist they can fly because they've seen birds do it. But oh, we were only getting started. Things were about to get so much worse.
Last week, the Vatican Museums, the Sistine Chapel. I was standing there with a group of 20 people, everyone's neck craned back, looking up at Michelangelo's ceiling. The light filters through the windows just right in the morning. You can see every detail, every muscle and every figure, every fold of cloth, every expression on every face. It took Michelangelo 4 years to paint that ceiling. 4 years lying on his back on scaffolding, paint dripping into his eyes, his body twisted in pain. 4 years of pure dedication to create something that would last forever. I was telling my group this story, how he mixed his own paints, how he refused help because he wanted every brushstroke to be his own, how he wrote poems about how much his back hurt. People were quiet, absorbed, understanding the weight of what they were seeing. Then a man spoke up, mid-30s, wearing a polo shirt and those sunglasses that clip onto regular glasses. Why didn't he just use a projector? I thought I misheard him. The chapel has strange acoustics. Voices bounce around in weird ways. I'm sorry, what? A projector, project the image onto the ceiling and trace it. Would have taken like a day, maybe 2. I felt my eye twitch. Just a small twitch, but it was there. Sir, this was painted in 1512. Electricity wasn't... Right, but couldn't they have used a generator? Time stopped. I swear the other tourists turned to look at him. Even in the dim light of the chapel, I could see their faces. Confusion, disbelief. One woman's mouth was actually hanging open. I explained, as calmly as I could, that generators also require electricity, that electricity wasn't harnessed for human use until the 1800s, that the concept didn't even exist in 1512. He nodded along, like he was really listening, like he was taking it all in. Then he said, "But if they'd had generators, they could have used projectors, right?" I didn't answer. I physically could not form words. I just turned around, faced the wall, and pretended to look very closely at a cherub for about 30 seconds while I collected myself.
And now, we arrive at the Colosseum story, the one from the beginning. A beautiful September morning, the air finally cool enough to breathe. I love the Colosseum in September. The summer crowds thin out a bit. The light hits the ancient stones in this golden way. You can almost imagine what it looked like when it was new, when 50,000 Romans packed into those seats to watch the games. I was explaining the layout, how gladiators entered through the Gate of Death, how that name wasn't just dramatic, it was literal. Gladiators who died in combat were dragged out through that gate. It was practical, a way to clear the arena floor between fights, but it was also symbolic, life and death all in one building. A woman in a white visor raised her hand. Why'd they call it that? Seems negative. Did anyone complain? I blinked at her. The sun was bright, maybe I was having heat stroke. Ma'am, they were gladiators. Most of them were slaves or prisoners. They didn't exactly have a complaints department. Then her husband jumped in. He was wearing a shirt with an American flag made of barbecue ribs. I remember that shirt very clearly because I stared at it while questioning all my life choices. You know, he said, if they'd built this closer to the city center, way more people could have come. My voice came out flat, dead. Sir, this was the city center. Yeah, but like, near the hotels and stuff, the good restaurants, would have made more sense for traffic flow. I had to walk away. I actually turned my back on my own tour group and walked about 10 feet toward a crumbling wall. I faced that wall. I pressed my hand against stone that had stood for 2,000 years, and I asked the universe why it was testing me like this. Behind me, I could hear him still talking about optimal placement strategies, about foot traffic patterns. For gladiator fights in 80 AD, he was applying modern business logic to ancient Roman entertainment.
2 weeks ago, smaller tour, just 6 people. We were in a little museum looking at ancient Roman coins, real coins that people used to buy bread and wine 2,000 years ago, coins with the faces of emperors stamped into them. I was explaining how currency worked in ancient Rome, how they had different values, how the economy functioned. An American dad, maybe 45 years old, interrupted me. Why didn't they just use credit cards? His teenage son looked at him. I looked at him. A security guard in the corner looked at him. Even a pigeon that had somehow gotten inside the museum turned its head toward him. Dad, the son said quietly, they didn't have... I know, the dad said, louder than necessary. I know they didn't have them, but they should have invented them sooner. Would have been way more convenient. He then spent 5 minutes explaining to me, to his embarrassed son, and to anyone unfortunate enough to be within earshot, why the Romans were bad at innovation, why they didn't think ahead to modern banking systems, why their economy would have been stronger with plastic cards and ATMs. The Romans, the people who built an empire spanning 3 continents, who created concrete that's still stronger than modern concrete, who built roads so good we still use them, who gave us aqueducts and sewage systems and the foundation of Western law, bad at innovation. I felt something break inside me that day. Some small piece of my soul just gave up and floated away. But here's the finale, the story that made me go home and seriously reconsider my entire career. The story that made me understand why Giovanni had that look in his eyes. 3 days ago, a private tour, just 2 people, an American couple. They seemed lovely at first, very sweet, very excited. They held hands while walking. They said please and thank you. They tipped the gelato guy. I thought, maybe, just maybe, this will be an easy day. We were at St. Peter's Basilica, the main church for Catholics all over the world. It's enormous. The ceiling seems to touch the sky. Light pours through stained glass windows in colors that don't seem real. Marble everywhere, polished so smooth it looks like it's glowing. And right in the center, over the main altar, is Bernini's baldachin. The baldachin is this massive bronze canopy. It stands almost 100 feet tall, 4 twisted columns holding up an ornate covering, all made of bronze that Bernini took from the Pantheon itself. It weighs thousands of pounds. It took 9 years to build. It's one of the most important pieces of Baroque art in the entire world. Priceless doesn't even begin to cover what it's worth. I was explaining all of this, the history, the artistry, how Bernini was a genius who changed architecture forever. The couple was listening, nodding, taking photos. The wife had tears in her eyes. I thought she was moved by the beauty of it all. Then she gasped and grabbed her husband's arm. "Oh, honey," she said, "we should get one for our living room." I smiled. Tourists say quirky things all the time. I thought it was cute, a little joke about how nice it would look at home. I started to move on with the tour. The husband pulled out his phone.
How much would shipping be? I stopped walking. I'm sorry, what? Shipping, like to get it to Ohio. We have a big living room, high ceilings. It would fit. My brain stuttered. Sir, this is St. Peter's Basilica. This is the Vatican. The baldachin is a priceless piece of... I'll give you $5,000. I felt like I was in a dream. One of those dreams where nothing makes sense, but you can't wake up. You want to buy Bernini's baldachin? Yeah, $5,000 cash. Well, Venmo. Do you take Venmo? His wife was already measuring the ceiling with her eyes. We'd need to knock out that wall between the living room and the dining room, but it would be worth it. I tried to explain. I really did. I explained that this wasn't a store, that the baldachin had been here for almost 400 years, that it was literally built into the structure of the church, that you cannot just buy pieces of the Vatican like you're shopping at a furniture store. The husband nodded along. He seemed to be listening. Then he looked at me very seriously and said, "Okay, I get it. You drive a hard bargain. $6,000, and I'll throw in an extra $1,000 if you can get it delivered by Christmas." I stood there in one of the holiest sites in Christianity while a man from Ohio tried to negotiate the purchase of a 17th century masterpiece like he was buying a couch on Facebook Marketplace. He asked if there was a manager he could speak to. He asked if the Pope did payment plans. He asked if I got commission and said he'd make sure I got a cut if I helped make the deal happen. Another tour group walked by. Their guide, Maria, caught my eye. She'd been doing this even longer than me. She just shook her head slowly, like she'd seen it all before. Like this was just another Tuesday in Rome.
Look, here's what 7 years of this job has taught me. Americans don't debate us just because they think we're wrong. They debate because their entire culture tells them something different than ours does. It tells them that confidence is the same as knowledge, that having an opinion means you're smart, that if you can Google something, you can debate it with anyone. It's not that they're trying to be rude. They genuinely believe that their 20-minute internet search makes them qualified to question people who've spent decades studying these things. And honestly, I can laugh about it now. The guy who wanted the Colosseum moved, his full reasoning was that it would have gotten better foot traffic near the Piazza Navona. Better foot traffic for gladiator fights in 80 AD. I actually laughed out loud when he said it. He thought I was agreeing with him. So next time you travel, maybe just let the tour guide talk. We might have studied this stuff. We might know a little bit about it. Just a thought. Just a small suggestion from someone who's been corrected about Roman history while standing in actual Rome. Drop a comment and tell me the wildest thing you've ever heard a tourist say. And if you're American, listen, I'm sorry, but also, thank you. Thank you for funding my entire industry. Thank you for keeping me employed. And thank you for giving me stories that make my friends cry with laughter at dinner parties.